Straight Up 30, where we make policy make sense in 30 minutes or less. I'm your host, Ross Izard, and today we're going to talk about what the hell we mean when we talk about policy to begin with. And our guest today is Jake Fogelman. He is the Director of Policy at Independence Institute, which is a free market think tank located here in Denver, where he gets up to all kinds of nerdy stuff every day. So Jake, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here, Ross. Thanks for having me.
So one of my problems working in policy for a long time, and I think folks probably know from the first episode that I, these days, am a political guy. I spend a lot of my time in lobbying, advocacy, elections, that kind of stuff. But back in the day, I was a professional nerd. I worked at a think tank, happened to be the same think tank that you work at now, as a matter of fact. I wrote white papers, I did numbers, I did analyses, I went to conferences and talked about smart people stuff. And then I would go to like family holidays, or I'd go out with folks and they'd be like, what do you do for a living?
Oh, yeah.
And I'd say, well, I work in policy. And they'd say, what the hell does that mean? And I'd say, well, it's public policy, like laws. And they say, well, what the hell does that mean? And I was so bad at translating what it meant and what I do for a living that I eventually just stopped. And I actually just started saying, I work in politics, because I gave up. And I think that was the beginning of the end for me, to be honest with you. That was when I started my slide into the evil Darth Vader universe of political work. But policy is a separable thing from politics. And I think that's something that a lot of folks don't get. They both work hand in hand. There's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram. But working in policy professionally is a really interesting gig. And it's one that a lot of folks, I don't think, understand fully. And they really don't have any picture of what that means. So I'm hoping today maybe you can help us work through that and understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I totally relate to your story. Can't tell you how many times I say, oh, I work at a think tank or I work in policy, and people either look at you and just say, and they go to my wife and ask what she does, or the same question, what does that even mean? And it's a good question for people that don't live in the Beltway. They've probably never heard of someone working in policy, or that's even feasible to do. But we don't deal with candidates. We don't deal with elections. We deal with what happens sort of in between that period, is when those folks are elected, what they're actually doing on the job. And our job is to try to shape that to the best of our ability, aligned with a certain set of principles. And the think tank that I work at, that you used to work at, is based on a set sort of North Star principles, a set of foundations, limited government, free markets, all the like. So we try to come up with policy solutions to the problems of the day, filtered through that lens, and offer them to lawmakers, regulators, and also try to educate the general public too, because those folks ultimately are the ones that will be voting for those people that make that policy a reality.
Yeah, so let's back it up even further, right? You said policy solutions to issues that people are facing, right? And I think sometimes folks don't have a clear sense of what that means in practice, right? So we can go on the news and look at what's happening in immigration, for instance, or we could talk about guns, or we could talk about abortion, or we could talk about education, but they're treated as these sort of like macro policy issues, right? Like, what do you care about? Well, I care about immigration. They're not treated as micro issues,
right,
with the solutions part of what we're actually doing. And I wonder if you could talk, at a very elementary level about what that means. So like, let's say we identify an issue of some kind, and we want to go do something about that issue that isn't passing some type of massive congressional package or omnibus bill or whatever. What does that mean? What are you modifying? What are you suggesting? What are you looking at?
Sure. So a basic one that I think would be easy for people to grapple with is everyone cares about affordability right now. That's a really hot buzzword in the political sphere, is affordability. And so someone from my perspective, and what I might propose to help someone address with affordability or cost of living concerns, is say, why don't we cut the income tax so that you get to keep a little bit more of your paycheck? You're working hard as it is. You get to keep a little bit more money in your pocket. Someone from a different perspective might say, what we need to do? We need to subsidize this or that can ease some of the cost pressures in your life. And that's where the minutia gets into it. Is yes, we all care about affordability. We care about the economy, but there are separate, discrete policy levers you can kind of pull to play in that space. And a tax cut is maybe one that I think everyone can understand. But it gets, like you said, it gets even more micro than that and can get super wonky. My background before I was the king of the nerds, like you said, director of policy, was...
I didn't say that. You said that.
implied, was focused solely on energy policy. And energy, boy, you want to talk about a can of worms of nerddom, is dealing with utility commissions and these regulatory bodies that the average Coloradan probably has never even heard of. And if they have, they just see it in a news blurb one time or two. And it's getting in the weeds and shaping regulations before they even hit your energy bill that you pay every single month. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these micro policy decisions.
Yeah, and I think something that a lot of folks don't, maybe they don't understand, they don't have occasion to, I suppose, but all of the stuff that happens in your day-to-day life, I mean, literally anything, right? From driving on the roads to getting a glass of water to having heat in your house or
Yep.
paying your energy bill, using a credit card, whatever. It's almost impossible to find any single part of the human experience or your life that is not somehow impacted by or touched by or governed by public policy somewhere. And those policies live in very specific places, right? So there's a set of laws, the code that lives out there, Colorado Revised Statutes here in Colorado. And it's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pages that contain within them the answers to why stuff is the way that it is for you most of the time. And then you layer on top of that federal legislation and federal law, which stacks. Then you have the regulatory side, which for those who don't follow this stuff closely, regulatory pieces and rules are sub-statutory requirements that are written by usually state agencies or government agencies of some kind. And they layer on yet one more thing. And so when you talk about policy analysis and being a policy analyst, I think it's important for folks to understand that you're not necessarily just engaging with stuff conceptually, right? It's not like we want lower taxes or we want more immigration or less immigration or wherever you happen to be coming from. It's about actually digging into this specific language and then monkeying around with it.
That's right.
Maybe talk a little bit about that. When you find this thing and you get into, we need to make this change, where are you making the change and what goes into what that change looks like? The final version.
Well, it's almost every single part of the process. Aside from federal, we are a state-based think tank, and quite frankly, the state is where most of the action that controls your life happens. But almost every part of the process that you laid out. So a lawmaker might propose a bill that touches on a policy area that we cover. So let's say it's energy. We would be involved in that legislative process, reading the bill language, seeing what it does, seeing if we like the language. If we don't like the language, we can either write an op-ed or even directly contact a lawmaker to suggest tweaks to make it better. Let's say it passes, and as is often the case, especially these days in Colorado, every piece of legislation kicks something to a regulatory body to interpret that language or promulgate rules enacting that legislative language. We would then get involved at the regulatory agency to do the same thing. Rulemaking is a very specific process where they propose a rule and then everyone gets to comment on it. And so we would be involved in that commenting process to provide feedback, because ultimately that regulation is what's giving force to that piece of legislation that passed. So it's really just interacting with the specifics, the language, breaking down, what the bill is going to mean or what the regulation is going to mean for the average Coloradan. How can it be improved? Maybe crunching some numbers. Like you said, we get to be numbers guys sometimes and say, what is this going to do to the bottom line of a family's budget? Or what is this going to do to the macro economy of Colorado? Is this going to kill jobs? Is this going to make it harder for people to start businesses? You name it. We try to have a role in answering all of those questions.
And a lot of it's kind of scalpel work, right? Like, I think people assume that politics is this big, violent scrum, right? And we're all just down there punching each other in the face. And I mean, that does happen sometimes.
Right.
We often do want to punch each other in the face, so that's not completely unfair. But I liken it more to brain surgery, right? You're not trying necessarily to repeal an entire statute. You're not trying to blow something up or like get rid of a title in the code.
Sure.
Sometimes you're having debates about the word and, or the word or the word shall, or the word may, or where a semicolon sits in it. And I think it's worth noting that there is an entire class of people who are not attorneys, right? Attorneys deal with laws after they've been put together. They're not often dealing with making changes to them or suggesting changes, but whose job it is to really understand at a nitty-gritty level exactly what needs to change in a law to make it do whatever it is you're hoping it'll do.
That's right.
And then transmit that information in a way that's actually understandable to a policymaker or to the public or to the media or whoever. And that's not an easy thing to do,
Nope.
right? Because you're doing this intricate stuff that to anybody you would look like a crazy person, right? Like you got the red yarn and you're deleting the word and stressing about where this period goes in this sentence. But it matters.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it matters for millions of people.
Yep.
And then you got to figure out how to put it together and package it and get it out there so that folks understand, which is a communications question.
Yep.
And that's a huge part of what you do too.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So because of my role, I get to have a foot in multiple different rooms of part comms, part policy guy, part almost research director overseeing the nerdy white papers that we put out. So I play around in a lot of different spaces in this process, but you're absolutely right about some of the minutia. Just to give a concrete example of one thing we were proud to play a role in, a recent policy to change the definition of clean energy in the state of Colorado. To your point, clean energy, we kind of have at least a general intuition of what that means. But it turns out it really mattered for state policy. The existing statute pre-2024 specified very specific forms of energy that could qualify as clean that would then be able to meet the state's decarbonization goals. One of them that we thought should be included was nuclear energy, which is a carbon-free source of energy.
It's zero emissions.
Zero emissions. We thought, in most states, it is considered clean because of that. In Colorado, though, it was specifically excluded. And so we said, hey, if we want to meet our decarbonization goals, we shouldn't be taking things off the table. Certainly not the biggest source of zero carbon power in the country. And this was a process of many years talking to lawmakers, explaining to them why it matters that we should include nuclear. And they'd understand and say, yeah, sure, but it seems so small. It's just changing a definition. And it really took 3 years before finally, it seems like all the pieces lined, lawmakers got on board, Independence Institute and other groups got involved and were able to testify and raise public awareness about this. And sure enough, in 2024, a bill finally passed that added nuclear to the state's clean energy statutes. And so now, if a utility wants to propose a nuclear power plant project, it would count for the state's carbon goals and they wouldn't be penalized for using a disfavored resource.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot there, right? Yeah. The interesting thing about this particular issue is that it deals with definitions. And in every bill you ever look at, if you're ever bored and you want to indulge yourself in unnecessary brain damage, you can go onto the General Assembly's website, pull down a bill and look at it. And at the very front of pretty much every bill, you have the summary and then you have a legislative declaration, which is, you can ignore those parts. But then you have the definition section where it literally says this word means this, and this word means this, and this word does not mean this. And often those definitions don't track with normal people. That's definitions. Right. They're so even though you and I could say clean energy, that may not be how it's defined in the law, and in your case was not how it was defined. And so you're going in, you're playing around with the definition of clean energy, and then you touched on a whole bunch of kind of cascading effects from that, right? That one little change now deals with whether or not something could be counted towards the state's carbon goals. And that's important because if Colorado ever wants to get to something that looks like zero emissions, which is the stated goal, mathematically we kind of can't unless we start pulling in other forms of energy. So talk about the sort of downstream impacts of this little tiny change that you make in the policy and then the potentially big impacts that it has down the road.
Yeah, it goes back to your original point about just how vast Colorado revised statutes are, because even little bills are sort of built like Russian nesting dolls, where a definition here is the foundation which this law is built on, which is the foundation which this law is built on, and so on and so on and so on, in infinite regress. But
it's all turtles all the way down.
It's turtles all the way down. It's it's brain damage at the Capitol all the way down. With the clean energy example, yes, Colorado has very ambitious and rigorous statutory goals that says by 2050, all of the utilities shall be, I think they use 100% decarbonized based on a year baseline, a certain level of emissions baseline. And to meet that goal, they have to use clean energy and eligible energy resources. And so getting that definition right really matters, because those are billions upon billions of dollar investment decisions that these regulated utilities have to make multiple decades down the road that will ultimately impact the bills that you and I pay when we pay our electric bill at the end of the month. And so, adjusting that definition really matters for that piece, but also for just the feasibility of this, as you alluded to. If you're going to be eliminating certain kinds of resources that don't fit that definition of clean, you need something that's going to replace the attributes that they provided to the grid. So for now, we have coal and natural gas that are always available resources, keep the lights on all the time. Once those go away, wind and solar can provide power, but they don't They're not what we energy wonks call dispatchable, where you can't just turn them on and off whenever you want. And so you need something that can
Because
fill
you have
that
to store
gap.
the energy somehow.
That's right. Yeah, batteries can play a small piece of that puzzle, as storing that energy for use when they're not producing. But right now we don't have batteries that can do that for much longer than 4 to 6 hours, and certainly not for days on end. And that's where something like nuclear, that doesn't produce carbon emissions or other disfavored greenhouse gas emissions, but can run all around the clock for 18-month stretches at a time without ever missing a beat. That's pretty valuable stuff to have if you're trying to undertake this, economy-wide transition. And so that's where the definition really mattered. We were finally able to get some lawmakers to see it our way, and we made some progress.
How did you get them to see it your way? What did you have to tell them to get them there? Because this has been going on for, a long time, years, you said.
So just for our part alone, we produced 3 separate, very detailed white papers with all the wonky energy modeling showing what it would cost if we do it without nuclear, and how we could save money if we included nuclear, what it would do for the reliability of the electric grid to include nuclear or exclude nuclear. So we did the wonk piece. We paid for some polling to get a gauge of where the people of Colorado are at, because politicians are elected people. They tend to care what the people of Colorado think, because they need them for their job. And our polling results came back, and they were pretty positive. We found that the majority of Republicans, a majority of unaffiliateds, and even a plurality of Democrats were already on board with including nuclear as clean energy. And so we released those findings. And then, because just the nature of the state and where we are sort of philosophically and who controls the legislature, we realized we needed to reach out to some partners to help us in this. And so we started reaching out to environmental groups and other constituencies that maybe have a little more sway down with the current leadership at the Capitol, and said, hey, you and we may not agree on a whole lot, but we agree on this issue. Will you join us in our efforts to raise the awareness of this issue? We hosted events at the II. We're fortunate enough to have a big event space at II and great, technical capabilities to broadcast these events that we do. And we invited lawmakers and had these groups from all these different walks of life and beliefs to extol the virtues of making this change. And sure enough, it ended up passing. And I think there was only, at least in the Senate, I think there was only 6 votes that voted against this bill. So it was, in a divided political age that we're living in, we were able to get a pretty broad consensus after all that work.
That's not super uncommon, right? Like, one of my favorite things about working with politics, because there's so many folks who just work with the politics of this, right?
Yeah.
You can go down and you can pull a lobbyist at the Capitol, and they probably understand just enough about what they're working on to be able to show up and tell this representative or this, vote this way, vote, we like this, we don't like that.
Yeah.
But they aren't really engaging deeply with the policy question. You go on the media, they're not really engaging deeply with the policy question because it's complicated and people would rather hear you call the other guy a name.
That's
right.
right.
And there's sort of this, and you said it, we live in a divided political age, and folks believe that we live in an age where we can't work together on the issues that matter to us. So there's these broad divides on all these controversial issues, and people are starting to throw their hands up and say, well, we just, we can't do it. We can't work together. And that's kind of true if you're at the macro level, right? So like, if you're just pro or anti something, you probably are going to have a hard time because it's just a binary yes or no. That guy's a yes, you're a no, and then you're not getting anywhere. But on these very specific policy issues, one of the coolest things for me was that it sort of circumvents that. And it allows you to do what you just said, which is sit down with all these groups who have wildly different philosophical approaches, different opinions, different belief systems, different political alignments, different people that they're trying to keep happy in their stakeholder groups. And they can't show up and like be you. Like, you're never going to convince them to buy into your worldview.
Right.
But on this specific issue, you can get them there. And there are opportunities for real collaboration, real cooperation, and real discussion with people who maybe would never sit at a table with one another and would never be in a room with one another, because you're engaging with a very specific thing that doesn't make them blow up and annihilate their entire political identity. And I think that's a really powerful part of policy work that people skip. It's not just that the policy matters, it's that engaging with the policy is a bridge.
Yep, that's right. And it's why, it's why I generally prefer policy and issues to politics, because politics is sort of a zero-sum game. It's my party wins, your party loses. That's what we're looking for. My party wins, your party loses. With a policy issue, you can find these little cross currents where we might both support a certain policy move, maybe for different reasons, but if we're both rowing in the same direction, all the better. We can collaborate, and you can extol the virtues from your point of view, why it's a good thing to do. I can extol the virtues from my point of view, why it's the right thing to do. And you can convince the respective camps that would otherwise, like you said, be throwing slings and arrows at each other. Well, if this guy says it's in my interest, then I can support that. And if this guy says it's in my interest, I can support it. And then you can actually get things done. And that's why it's really a blessing to be able to work in a space that focuses on those issues, because then I can go out and look for those opportunities to collaborate with all these groups and get something done while everyone else screams at each other on TV.
I mean, that's part of why we focus on issues on this show, right? And
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times we would have an issue where we're working on a very specific policy piece, and like me and 4 or 5 other people are on the same page with this piece. And then we'll walk across the hall to the next committee room, and it's a different issue on a different piece. And now we're not friends anymore.
That's right.
And you kind of wipe your face, and you're like, okay, are we friends or are we not friends on this one? And I think cross current is a really good way to put it. There are broad political waves, but then there are these micro currents that fundamentally underneath all of it come down to the fact that most people would like society to work.
That's right.
And if you want society to work, you're going to have to engage with the policy issues, or else you might get bad results. And I wonder if maybe you could talk a bit about that, right? So let's say big political efforts, and you scrum and you fight and you punch each other in the face and you pass something, but nobody really read the something before you passed it. What happens then? And how does that intersect with your job as a policy analyst?
Yeah, well, if no one was paying attention beforehand, we kind of have to go out there and do this is where the comms part, the PR part that you were alluding to earlier is, and it's our job then to, ring the bell and go out there and be the town crier and say, look, this is a good thing that actually happened. I know you're all sitting here and despairing at the state of politics, but good things can happen. This good thing did happen. Here's how it'll benefit you. And we might do that through the written word, although fewer and fewer people read these days, much to my chagrin. But
I actually can't read.
Yeah. My boss would tell you I can't either. Or we might, do a podcast or videos where we try to reach people where they are and get the information out to them to let them know that no, good things still are happening. And, even though there's an asymmetry in how it's covered, someone's got to do it. And someone's got to let people know that good things are still happening and progress can be made.
That's right. So tell us a little bit more about what you've got on deck. We're working on energy, obviously. That's
right.
something that Independence is big on.
Mm-hmm.
But as you're looking at the session and where we go from here for the rest of 2026, it's going to be a long 12 months.
Yeah.
What are you working on? What are you looking at?
Yeah, the session just kicked off, and I can already tell it's going to be another busy one. So, one of the things that we really stake our identity to is the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, right? Passed in 1992 by the voters of Colorado. In broad strokes, it says that you, the voter of Colorado, get to decide whenever the government raises your taxes, you have to vote before they can do that. And it year to year limits how much government can, how much of your tax money they can retain based on a nerdy formula related to population and inflation. I won't get into the wonky details, but as you might expect, anything that limits the government's ability to spend and do things on its own can sometimes be a burr in their saddle, and they would like to be able to retain more of your money to do various things. And it's really come to a head this year. We've had multiple years in a row now where we go into session looking at up to $1 billion in shortfall. Colorado's budget has to be balanced every single year. That's in the Constitution. And so people, I think, are getting really sick and tired of doing the things that politicians hate to do, which is make tough decisions and figure out where to cut and get rid of the things that maybe they were really proud to pass 5 years ago, but we can't afford anymore. And so instead, they're looking to go after that Taxpayer Bill of Rights, in particular, the piece that caps how much money they're allowed to take in every year. So for folks listening, they don't know TABOR, but they may be familiar with the fact that you sometimes get a TABOR refund when you file your taxes. And that's because whenever they keep more revenue than they're allowed to under TABOR, they have to, under the Constitution, give you some of that money back. They would like it to change that so that they can, instead of refunding you in years where there's a surplus, they would like to just retain that themselves, and then they can plug the budget hole that way, and they don't have to go through the rough, sharp elbows, everyone jockeying over their respective policy choice and make cuts. So I think that's going to be a knockdown, drag out fight for us. It's something we consider an existential issue, is keeping the integrity of TABOR intact as best as we can. And then, like you said, energy. I'm hearing rumors that those decarbonization goals that we just talked about, I'm hearing rumors that some folks would like to accelerate that by an entire decade, which is a hell of a grenade to leave in the room as you're leaving the leaving the Capitol. If you can read between the lines, this is Governor Polis. This is what he wants to do. And so we will be heavily involved in that, I'll say. Especially this is another case where we're working with outside groups as well that would be affected by that choice. So we'll have our hands full. Pretty much anything to do with taxes, spending, the budget, energy, you name it, we're going to be focused on it this session.
And education and a few other things too. I mean, independence kind of gets into a whole bunch of stuff, which is an interesting thing. You've got a bunch of nerdy folks hanging out in a spaceship talking about how to fix this stuff, which is it's cool, and it's a really unique line of work. If somebody wanted to go and learn more about Independence Institute or read the work that you're doing or follow the issues that you're following, where would they go do that?
Yeah, they can go to thinkfreedom.org. That's our Independence Institute website. You can check it, all the various, whatever policy center you're interested in, whether it's fiscal, education, energy. It's right there on the website. You can also go to IITV on YouTube to check out our video products. We host multiple podcasts and we release video content all the time. It's increasingly the way that people prefer to get their information these days, as I'm sure you realize doing this show that you're doing here now. So folks can check that out. If they like energy stuff and they want to nerd out on energy, I'd be thrilled if they are. They can go to powergab.org, which is our energy-only podcast. And then Complete Colorado is sort of our newspaper arm where we do original reporting, and a lot of our policy folks, their commentary will appear in Complete Colorado.
Awesome. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these issues, go and check out these resources. If you want to just go and read them yourself, you can go to the state legislature and read them yourself. But whatever you do start paying attention to policy, because it is a undervalued piece of the conversation that I think is the core of, well, good government in general, but also maybe the core of not killing each other and having something that looks like reasonable political discourse in the country. So, Jake, thanks for joining us. I know you're not going to be bored here over the next 12 months or so, but really appreciated an inside look at what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Anytime, Ross.
All right, that'll wrap us up for this episode of the Straight Up 30. We'll see you back here real soon.